My childhood was spent in Southern California. We lived in a little town called La Cañada, which is on the west side of the Arroyo Seco. Pasadena is on the east side. And during the Depression, my folks were always looking for the least expensive entertainment they could find, and they used to take us out to Kellogg's in Pomona, because Kellogg's had picnic benches set up on their property under the oak trees, and then they would offer a Sunday horse show. It had bleachers set up in a show ring where they gave us horse show, and so that was my introduction to Arabian horses, and I was fascinated right from the get-go. The next thing that happened was that my mother found at the Pasadena Public Library a copy of Raswan's book, Black Tents of Arabia, and brought that home to me. So that turned me on to Raswan. Anyway, my dad would take me, after the war, would take me to horse shows. And Southern California had a fairly active group of Arabian breeders who put on some of the first all-Arabian shows. And so we would go to them. And we would often also visit at the barns. And some of those wonderful people were just great to a kid. They were very encouraging and friendly to a kid. One of them was Alamein. Donna Jones was another. I'm blocking on some of the other names. Harvey Ellis. He was a veteran who had a horse, a mare named Moneyna, and he rode her without a bridle. And he used to do that. He used to demonstrate that at horse shows, but also he was a friend of Alasein's, and he would ride on her trail rides with his mare, Moneyna. And she was half Davenport. He bred her to Ferseyn and got Ferneyn, who was a pretty popular Ferseyn bred stallion back in that day. Anyway, that was a very important influence on me, the way how friendly those people were. And I was just, I'd fallen for Arabian horses by then. And he got into school, of course, and I couldn't have a horse while I was in high school or college, but went on through med school, and I was going to med school at Stanford, which is in the Bay Area. Went over to see Mrs. Draper, Edna Draper, who had Serene among other horses. And she also had a Davenport stallion whose name now I'm blocking on. But she was a very interesting and a very warm, friendly person. After I finished medical school and married and finished my psychiatric residency, when we had our first child, we were visiting, this was in Denver. By then I had moved to Denver. I moved here for my psychiatric education. This is where I met my wife, and we put down our roots here. But anyway, we were visiting Southern California, visiting my parents, when our first little boy was about a year old. And my dad and I went out to visit Alamein. And by then she was really concentrating on the Raffles line and on Raffles. She had at one time or another every bloodline, but she fell in love with Raffles really, and was inbreeding heavily to him. And she had an amazing herd of horses. They looked so uniform to me. And she took my dad. I was off admiring Rasraf, I think it was, and she took my dad aside and said, "Do you think he's really serious? Do you think he's gonna get into owning Arabians himself?" And my dad said, "Yeah, I really think he will." And so she recommended to me. Well, she told me that she was offering to serious people to make an offer of that person taking a 3-year-old mare that was bred and in foal, and take the mare home, take care of her, see her through the foaling, and return her to Alamein, and then the foal would be this new breeder's. But she said, I think before you decide what you're going to do, you should go see the Davenport horses at Charles Craver's place. And by then, of course, I was familiar with Charles Craver's ads, and he was advertising in the Arabian Horse News, particularly some very nice photographs of Tripoli, and I was taken with him. And I was somewhat influenced by my dad too. Dad was more of a thoroughbred man. His own father was a good horseman and took race horses off the track. Where they may not have done very well in racing, but he would acquire them and take them home and make them into ranch horses. And Dad liked a good sized horse with a long swinging stride. That was very important to him. So he liked a little bit bigger horse. And he thought that Alasein's horses were beautiful, but he thought they were too small. Anyway, the next year, my wife and our children were visiting. By then we had 2. Were visiting her parents on the East Coast for Christmas, and on the way home, we stopped off to see Charles Craver. And it was a snowy, blustery, kind of a miserable day, actually. But he brought out his stallions and showed us everyone, and he brought out as many horses as he could show us. And I did like them. I liked them very much. And there was one mare that caught my eye, and that was Antan. Thought that she had a prettier head than the others, although there were many attractive heads there. But I was quite taken with Antan. And Charles' remark to me was, if you want a head like that, you need to go to the Gamil line. Gamil was Antan's dam. So I went back to the stud books and looked at that and found the name Maedae and Ibn Hanad. And I need to back up here. But when I visited Alamein, we discussed breeding stallions. What she considered to be a breeding stallion was a stallion who could produce as good as himself or better. And she gave me a list of 6 stallions. None of them she didn't include any of her own horses on that list. Well, one was Ibn Hanad, another was Tripoli, one was Seneyn, and one was a horse named Seneyn, Seneyn. And she said he was of the Ferseyn line, and she didn't like Ferseyn, but she did like Seneyn and thought that he was able to produce an amazingly uniform group of horses. That he belonged to the Whitmores in Utah. And then I couldn't remember the other 2 of the 6, and I corresponded further with Alamein, and she couldn't remember either. But anyway, it struck me that 2 of them were Davenports, Tripoli and Ibn Hanad. So I found the name of Maedae. Actually, she was one of 4 full siblings. One was Sonny Acres Darius, who was was one of the breeding stallions for Margaret Shuey. Margaret Shuey made all of those matings herself. The Gamil sons and daughters. Anyway, by some quirk in the Western Horseman, I subscribe to the Western Horseman as well as the Arabian Horse News. Back in the classified sections under horses, Maedae was listed for sale, and she was listed by name of all things. It was explained that she's a Davenport mare, and the owner was a man named Frank Brewster in southeastern Kansas. And I wrote to him and arranged to go see him. Actually, I was on active duty with the Army at that time and was living at the Fitzsimmons Army Hospital in the officers' quarters there. And we had another occasion to go to eastern Kansas, and so went on down to visit Mr. Brewster and saw Maedae, and she had at her side a filly that I thought was just exquisite. It had a very extreme head. Filly was sired by Ibn Fatal. Anyway, he wanted $3,000 for it, and I couldn't afford that, and so went home without a deal made. But he wrote me later and came down in price, and so I went ahead with the purchase. And I didn't have, I was hoping I could use the old stables on the Fitzsimmons campus, but couldn't get permission for that. So I didn't have a place to keep her, and I contacted Charles. And of course I wanted to breed her to Tripoli anyway. So Charles, the goodness of his heart, went down to Mr. Brewster's and picked up Maedae, and he persuaded me to buy a yearling filly named Ronnie, who was out of Maedae and sired by Ferneyn. I did buy her, and she was an outstanding filly. She was really quite flashy and beautiful mover. But she was chestnut with Blaise and 4 white stockings. She was very eye-catching. Anyway, I did go ahead with that purchase, and Charles found a place for her with a farmer near him in Illinois, and that guy leased Ronnie to breed to his stallion. He had a general list stallion. That ended in tragedy. She died in childbirth with that foal. But anyway, we went ahead with Maedae, breeding her twice to Tripoli. Got Mayfa. First one was a filly, Mayfa for me. The next one was Moth for Charles. And then he offered me whatever horse. He suggested that I now breed her again to Tripoli, since we already had a great success in having 2 Tripoli daughters from her. And he suggested that I breed her to Alamein, whom he had recently acquired from Canada. A beautiful horse. And the Otts, Jane and Kathleen Ott, contacted me and kind of pushed me to breed to Alamein. And I don't know what got my back up, but I sort of felt like they were interfering. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to do that. And my wife was quite taken with Sir, remarkable and a pretty well-known stallion for Charles and for Alice Martin. Anyway, we ended up deciding on Sir rather than Alamein. I really although we got a nice colt, and Charles acquired him at one point and used him well on excellent mares, and he was a good producer and made a good contribution to the breed. But if we had bred to Alamein, we could have produced, if we were successful anyway, we could have produced another non-Tripoli line. And that was why Charles wanted me to do it. I thought I was going to do that with Kamil and Salan, who I had acquired by then, that we would be producing a non-Tripoli line with them. But it would have been good to do both, and I feel like that's one of the mistakes that I made in my program. I wonder whether you knew, I think you probably did know, that the man from whom I got Kamil ibn Salan, his name is Robert Osborne, he used to go to horse shows with Jimmie Wrench, and Jimmie Wrench set up his breeding program. It was basically Wrench mares headed by a Davenport stallion. And the first stallion that Jimmie Wrench selected for them was a horse named Sherad, Sherad, who by blood was a full brother to Tripoli.
Okay.
But they were never able to get him to breed a mare. And the story was that he had been trailered with a mare that was in heat, and he tried to jump over the partition and turned over the trailer and was traumatized. And the story was that he wasn't afraid of trailers after that, he was afraid of mares. But I told Charles that story. He says, I'm not sure that's the real story. At any rate, Sherad didn't work out, so Jimmie Wrench found Kamil ibn Salan for Mr. Osborne. And he used him, and if you look at Kamil ibn Salan's progeny, the first several were from Wrench mares, but that was at Robert Osborne's place. Let's see, where do we go on from there? Charles and I sent horses, both mares and stallions, back and forth. Our collaboration was really a wonderful broadening of our relationship. Charles was a great teacher and loved what he was doing, and his enthusiasm was very infectious. For instance, he sent us Periana. That was a very interesting choice. And Periana produced Persuasion for us, who bred on nicely, and Persnickety for him, who also bred on very nicely. He sent us Tyrebah and Bint Antan. I sent them both, and both bred and settled. But not too long after that, Bint Antan ate a whole block of salt, and it panicked me. She did not call it, but I was afraid she was going to. We had to vet out to check her, and she was all right. But I had a small place. I was managing it by myself. I had those two mares, and both of them were irreplaceable. Their own parents were gone by then, Tyrebah and Byzantium. So I asked Charles, much to his dismay, to take them back and not keep them here to be bred again to Kamil ibn Salan. But they both produced fillies from him, and both were very significant in the Craver program. one of the outstanding ones was Lotus, the daughter from Tyrebah, and a beautiful mare. Jeannie Craver considered her mare and rode her, but she was a beauty, and she also bred on well. Let's see, where are we in the order of things? Yes, at one point I was contacted by the owner of Hanad, Hanad, who was an Abu Hanad daughter, black mare, quite pretty, not perfectly correct physically, but really quite beautiful. And the owner wanted me to lease her, which I did. Bred her for me and for her. The foal that I got was a very beautiful bay filly that I named Sadie Thompson, and she had OOAM, which is the malformation in the upper vertebra. She was not terribly disabled from it, but it caused her to hold her head at a funny angle. She was able to nurse as a baby, even though she had this problem. And she lived to be 2 years old, and she was out playing with my other foals, and tried to jump a fence, which she didn't make, fell on her neck and broke it. And so that was a great loss, because she was quite a beauty, and I think it would have been impossible to breed her on. Let's see. Charles sent us Mimmack, a perfectly beautiful horse, and we were able to get a few foals from him. At that time, Charles was pointing out to us that we were breeding a group of horses which did not include the blood of the import Raseyn, the import mare Raseyn. And he said he felt like when this was possible to do something like this, it was worthwhile to pursue it, even though he said Raseyn added something very desirable to whatever pedigree she was in. But he did feel like when it was possible to do something like that, it was good to do it. And of course, we liked the horses that we were getting that were in that group. So he sent us Mimmack, and we were hoping to go on with him. He sired 2 colts from Kestrel, a mare that we had of our bloodline, but a mare that we had bought from Charles. And she was a queen. She was a beauty. And she carried 1 colt to 8 months, and he aborted. It looked to me, he was purple. He looked to me like he was going to be a black. He looked very, very fine at that age of gestation. We brought her back, and she carried another foal to full term. But he was huge and got caught up in the birth canal too long and didn't make it. He was not breeding when he was born. So we lost both of those foals, but both of those colts. It was really tragic as far as the carrying on that line was concerned, because After that, then, we lost Mimmack. He died of a colic. And so then that meant we were without a stallion in that tiny little program that included only the blood of Maedae, Tripoli, and Kamil ibn Salan. So we looked for something close, as close as possible, and we had contacted Debbie. I'm blocking on her current married name. Anyway, she owned Sergeant Major living in Illinois, and I was very impressed with him as an individual and favored him because he was out of Major Barbara. Major Barbara was one of the three sisters that we got from Moss and Kamil and Salan. They were Molly Brown, which was the foal that came to us, and then Charles got to the Major Barbara and Mimosa. And I thought that Major Barbara was the best of the three overall, perfectly beautiful. Mimosa had a beautiful head, particularly, and she was an impressive mare. And Molly Brown was just fine. She was a pretty mare and a very, very satisfactory riding horse for me. But anyway, so one of the horses that Charles sent out from his farm to ours was a stallion named Cathayx. And as Charles remarked at the time that he was sending him because he was carried Kamil ibn Salan blood in a little different form. A horse was by Hanad and out of Orient, who was a daughter of Kamil ibn Salan. And Cathayx sired Modesty Blaise for us out of Molly Brown. And she bred on. Modesty was black like Molly Brown was, and rather exotic looking. And she appears in the pedigrees of Mary Gill's horses. So she was important to us, and has bred on in an important way for the Davenport group. But anyway, that was a great opportunity that Sergeant Major was available. So he came out here for a breeding season, and we used him, and we're very happy with the results of that. One was the mare Lily Marlene, who was out of Kestrel, sired by Sergeant Major, and she was my last brood mare. And I looked around carefully for stallions for her, and heard good things about a horse named Bah-Rani, who was a distance horse, campaigned by Jay Wilson and Chris Leon Bruno. At that time, they were in Las Vegas. And I approached them about the possibility of getting him cleared for shipped semen, which they did and were willing to do and did. And so we bred Lily Marlene to him and got a horse that we called Flashback. The reason for that was his markings. I thought his markings looked like a duplicate of Gamil's, and he had crosses to Gamil, and so I called him Flashback, and we ended up calling him Flash. Very, very nice. I was very happy with that mating. Beautiful, beautiful colt right from the get-go. But it then came to the time in my life when I needed to look at winding down and ending things. My family was persuading me to do that. And so I needed to look for homes for both Lily and Flash. Flash went to Chris and Jay, who are the owners of Bah-Rani, and they have since bought built really a new place in Cedar City, Utah. So that's where that horse is. Another Davenport breeder here in Colorado is Mary Gills, who has horses that one way or another are related to our horses. And she agreed to take Lily Marlene and give her a retirement home, which she has done. And so she has her up in Steamboat Springs, and friends of hers ride Lily, and she's got a great home there. So that's just about winds up my career. I have not emphasized enough the importance and the really overall joy of the relationship with Charles Craver. He was at one time in my opinion, the best horseman I had ever known. When I first got to know him, he was doing all the veterinary work on his horse, well, practically all the veterinary work on his horse, unless the horse really needed to go to a clinic. But the nearest vet to him was 60 miles away, and he did all kinds of veterinary procedures himself. And then when he had visitors like me, he would teach us how to do things, like how to pass a stomach tube and put oil into a horse's stomach, or he taught me how to do a Cathayx procedure on a mare that needed to have her vulva sewed up, a so-called wind-sucking mare. And I did that on a couple of my own mares. He taught me to trim feet, and throughout my career, I trimmed my horses. I didn't shoe horses, so if I needed shoes for trail ride or something like that, I'd use a local farrier that I liked and trusted. But other than that, my horses had their feet trimmed by me, and I taught our oldest son to do that, and he helped out in my later years with the trimming of the feet. But Charles' enthusiasm for these horses was infectious, and his expertise was just amazing. I mean, he was capable of bringing a horse in training up to Grand Prix dressage level. Did that with Tyrebah, a beautiful stallion Tyrebah, and he did it with a couple of horses. The other thing about Charles was that if he was working with a horse like that, he did not let other people ride that horse. And once he got to the point where he was satisfied with going as far as he wanted to go with that particular horse, then he might let other people ride the horse, and then he didn't. But there were several horses that he let me ride. That was a real pleasure. One, of course, was Tripoli. I was able to ride Sir when Sir was still at Charles' place. And he also let me ride Arabian. And those two horses were amazing, but they were quite different to ride. Sir was light, very light. Felt like a feather when you were moving with him, but animated and had lovely gaits. Aramis was a powerhouse, and I had the most impressive extended trot. He was a wonderful, and that was a thrill to ride him. Another that Charles used to let people ride was Pericles, who was a quiet, sweet stallion that if you could put anybody on him and he'd be sensible and quiet, and didn't matter if there were mares on the other side of the fence, or he didn't he didn't mess with other things. He took care of his rider. But I did want to say more about Charles. He was a genius when it came to breeding and selecting matings, and particularly with an eye towards preserving as much genetic diversity as possible. Just really a leader in doing that, and in passing on to us other breeders the importance of doing that and how to go about it. But Charles also always had a passion for riding, and he was pleased that the typical Davenport horse carried good riding horse qualities, and Charles had an eye towards that, and also taught that. He was, I don't really know where he learned what he knew. He went to Culver Military Academy, which had the Black Watch troop, and he was a captain in that troop. But I don't think that those riders were high-level dressage riders. So where he learned that, I don't know. But he did train some of his horses to a very high level. And we had many conversations about that and about different individual horses and their capacities. And one time while I was working with Tyrebahs, he said, when you have a horse like this one, a day that you don't ride him is a day lost. And that stuck with me, because I didn't have horses quite as talented as Tyrebah, but I felt that way about my horses too. Some of them I rode a lot, Kamil and Salan. I rode pretty frequently during those years when I had him. And I also was inspired by Charles to try to start every horse I had. We didn't have very many horses, but I would try to get them started under saddle at least, and get some sense of what their abilities were and what their potential might be. So I also asked him for permission to start the horses that he sent out to me. And one of the early ones was Moth, full sister to Mayfa. We had Moth and Mayfa here at the same time for several years. And at that time, I was taking riding instruction from a European dressage master that we were lucky enough to have here in the Denver area. And I took Kamil and Salan to him, and he would give me instruction. So actually both of us were being trained. And then this dressage master agreed to take both me and Barbara, and I rode Moth and Barbara rode Mayfa. So these green mares were getting trained at the same time Barbara and I were getting our lessons. Then later on, Charles sent Cathayx out. Cathayx was Zara by Hanad, and out of Orient, who was a Kamil ibn Salan daughter. He was a very substantial horse, a powerful horse, and I did start him under saddle. Just the very simple elementary working with him, but he was a powerhouse, and I thought he had wonderful potential to rival that of Tyrebah and some of the others that Charles had. And I was hoping that Charles would continue with him when we returned Cathayx to Craver Farms. But Charles didn't do that, and I was always disappointed. And I really think it was probably because I had started the horse. Charles didn't ride horses that other people rode, because he figured that his cues would be different from whoever it was. And but that was a disappointment. However, Charles was a great example of appreciating the horses. We talked at length about movement and the quality of movement and athleticism of the Davenport horses.